Critics of President Biden say weakness on the global stage is making America less safe, calling on him to be more decisive.
Well, this is an important aid package because it's a shift in policies on our European counterparts.
Congressman Mike Turner is chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence.
They have billions of dollars of Russian frozen assets, and they have pledged to use the interest from those assets to be able to assist Ukraine in fighting Russia. The symbolism of Russia's own capital being used to defend against assaults by Russia is a really important step and will aid Ukraine in its battle.
Peace talks were held in Switzerland over the weekend. Russia was not invited. In your view, what could peace look like in that region?
Well, obviously, Vladimir Putin is going to have to understand that he's not going to be able to achieve his objectives of incorporating Ukraine into Russia as part of his efforts to reassemble the former Soviet Union. The Russians have not been able to overwhelm Ukraine. Ukraine fought admirably. And the West has provided advanced weapon systems to Ukraine. Now, this administration has been too timid in the manner in which they've allowed the Ukrainians to use those weapons. And I think shifts in those policies will go a long way to help bring a resolution of this. Putin obviously entered into this conflict wanting to take all of Ukraine. There probably will be some portions of Ukraine that will either be retained by Russia or placed into a buffer. But the current lines that Ukraine is holding and that Russia is challenging are far too to the country to be stable for Ukraine, and certainly shouldn't be the basis of any final agreement.
President Biden traveled directly to a glitzy fundraiser in Southern California after his visit to Europe. What did you make of the president's performance on the world stage at the G7 this past week with some notable gaffes and missteps?
Well, I think he's performing on the international stage as he is on the domestic stage, and certainly as his relationship with Congress has shown. He appears confused, not in charge, unsure of even basic logistics. I think it certainly shows why there's confusion in the policies from the White House, which are policies that leave our border vulnerable and open, and certainly our economy at risk with inflation, and also leaves us vulnerable as Russia and China begin to saber rattle and become more aggressive on the world stage.
Seeing him on the world stage and recognizing that there's a presidential election on the horizon here in the U.S., you really see a different contrast, if you will, between him and former President Trump. Do you think that makes the allies nervous, not sure which direction America will go?
It should make everyone nervous. I mean, what I have seen in the Biden administration is because as a result of his lack of fully functioning, that the administration doesn't have a shadow president. There's no one in his cabinet who is calling the shots. They instead have formed a committee underneath the failing president. And that committee operates a lot like NATO. When they all agree and have consensus, they do great. When they don't, it falls apart, and then we have inaction. And that's what we're seeing in most of these policies, a result of Biden's inability to lead. We're seeing inaction, and that puts America at risk.
Russia has sent ships to our hemisphere, with a few now docked in Havana, Cuba. What's your assessment of the situation brewing in the Caribbean, and what can we do to protect ourselves if a Russian partnership grows in Cuba once again?
Well, this is part of the visible expression of the Biden weakness on the world stage. Russia is challenging the United States, not just in Ukraine, not just in Europe, but really around the world. They're doing so even in buzzing our aircraft that are in Europe, flying dangerously close without real response from this administration. Since the administration is afraid to stand up because they believe they'll be provocative, when in fact they should be responding to Russia's provocations, Russia continues to become more aggressive.
Mr. Chairman, looking at the border, numerous migrants have been arrested recently with terror ties, and thousands continue to pour over the border daily. How worried are you that an attack may be coming, given the amount of terror suspects who have crossed the border?
Well, very much so. That's why our committee has held an open hearing with FBI Director Wray, who has publicly stated that, in his view, that the intelligence shows that we are at grave risk for an impending terrorist attack. Our committee, in looking at the intelligence, concurs with Director Wray. These issues go directly to this administration's open border policies in the southern border. It's no longer speculative. It's no longer hypothetical that the administration's policies would result in terrorists coming across the border and coming across with intent to harm Americans. We are seeing that absolutely, and the administration and the FBI director is publicly stating it. This administration needs to reverse its Biden border policies and begin to round up these individuals that pose a threat and make certain that we keep Americans safe.
When you hear people say the warning lights are blinking red again in terms of potential threats to our country, should that make everyone stop and listen and pay attention to what's going on in our world?
Well, it should. And what's unfortunate about this time, I mean, when we had 9/11, there were things that were occurring of which we did not have an understanding. We had to reform both our border policies, our immigration policies, and our intelligence community, manner in which they collected intelligence and used intelligence. That was a result of mistakes we were making. This is a result of intentional policy changes that the Biden administration made to Trump policies that have resulted in over 9 million people coming across the border, many with terrorist ties and organizations that are planning, actively, these groups and organizations actively call for terrorist attacks against Americans in the United States. This is a known logical risk from what the Biden administration's policies are, and we're seeing that it has come to fruition, and we are now at risk.
President Biden took executive action recently trying to have an impact on the border, with voters saying that the border is a critical issue in this election. Do you think his executive action will have any impact at all on illegal immigration?
Well, there's certainly a couple of things that are striking about him doing so. First off, he said he couldn't take executive action, when in fact we know he took executive action to undo the Trump policies that had stemmed the flow at the border. He challenged Congress, said we had to do it by statute. Really, in effect, it would have resulted in our confirming his policies. And then now he's taken executive actions, which, by the way, fall far short of providing any real protections at the border. So the president is talking out of both sides of his mouth. He's saying he doesn't have authority when he used the authority to take down the Trump policies. Then he's saying Congress must act. And then now he's claiming he's acting. The reality is the border policies in the southern border are Biden's. It's a result of what he changed under the Trump administration, and they place us at risk.
In Israel, reports came out this weekend that 8 Israeli soldiers were killed in Rafah in an explosion. In your view, what is the future of this conflict, and what are the chances of seeing a ceasefire in the immediate future?
So I think Israel has to dismantle Hamas, not just because of October 7th, which was a horrendous terrorist attack, but because Israel cannot continue to function under the constant barrage of missile attacks that resulted in their implementation of the Iron Dome. Hamas has to, as a satellite franchise of Iran, has to be dismantled to prevent Iran from, through Hamas, continuing its murderous attacks on Israel. That obviously has been a very difficult task, and will as the United States looks to support Israel in both being able to defend itself and in eliminate Hamas, there are certainly grave concerns as to how the overall persecution of the conflict has unfolded both on Hamas's side and Israel's side that have resulted in risks to Palestinians.
We see conflict with allies in Ukraine, in Israel, and I think a lot of Republicans are asking, what's the plan? What's the path to victory? What's the vision? Would that help when these funding fights come up in terms of what you want to see happen with those American tax dollars and what the end game is?
Oh, absolutely. When you look at Ukraine itself, the president has been very slow to articulate overall goals and objectives. And even when he states areas of support he's going to provide, he slow walks it or provides it with constraints that have Ukraine fighting with one arm behind their back. And then similarly with Israel, they make contradictory statements of both support for their ability to dismantle Hamas and make wavering statements of whether bringing into question the United States support.
With those conflicts underway, are there any signs that China may take action against Taiwan during this time of turmoil around the globe?
Well, it certainly is of concern and something that everyone is watching. We know President Xi has openly stated his intention to incorporate Taiwan, even if by force, into China. The fact that the United States is in a vulnerable position with President Biden's failing to be able to exert leadership certainly does embolden our adversaries and does place Taiwan at risk.
He's the chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Mike Turner of Ohio. Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your time. Have a great week, sir.
Mike, thanks for having me.